The reason why, obviously, I'm not Dan Grossenbach, but we have Peter Pomonis today, who is going to speak to us about evolution versus intelligent design. And so I'm just going to open us up with some prayer, and at the end we'll have some announcements for different things. But why don't you bow your heads with me? Lord, thank you that we can come here to this place and learn about who you are and use reasoning to really dig into how you've created us, how you've created this earth, Lord. And we just pray that you would fill Peter with your wisdom, that you would speak through him, God, and that ultimately you would give us wisdom to share outside of this place, Lord. We thank you for what you're doing. It's in your son's name we pray. Amen. All right. Give it up for Peter Pomonis.
Okay.
All right. If you don't know who I am, this is just a real pleasure for me to be up here talking to you guys. I am, during my normal job is like computer networks and office systems. So that's what I do. That's what I really know. And this is just a passion and a hobby for me to be talking about this subject and in apologetics. And it's something, if you were here for the first class I just stated, that you know how you get that huge nagging doubt that this just can't be right, and why do other people have opposite views? And so I just decided just to investigate it and do a lot of reading about it. And so that's why I'm here today, is just to share that with you, because I do have a hope for the faith that's in me, and we do have good reasons to believe what we believe. And so I asked, volunteered Dan to be available to teach a section on evolution, Darwinian evolution specifically, and intelligent design. And how many of you were here last week? Because this is part 2, or last month. Just a few of you. Okay. Yeah, this is part 2. So I'm just going to do a rapid review. But my goal here is maybe just to instill some of the same interests to get you to do a little bit further research. There's lots of good resources that are at my level, at our level, that we can understand really what's going on in this world. But I'm just going to preface this by saying we're talking about Darwinian evolution, and specifically what's called neo-Darwinian evolution. That's the newer model of Darwinian evolution that they changed a little bit through biological discoveries over the last, especially 50 years. And what that is it is change over a long period of time from common descent, single organism, common descent from a single organism. And the mechanism of neo-Darwinian evolution is DNA that is mutated, random copying errors in it, and natural selection acts on those errors, meaning it produces something that's favorable to that organism, and so it wants to keep that trait. It makes it an inheritable trait. And so that's what's key to understand, that it's natural selection acting on a random mutation within DNA. Okay? So that's about as scientific as we're going to get, but it's important to understand that, because a lot of times people will talk about evolution and they don't define the term. And I think we all believe that evolution can mean change over time, and if that's all it is, of course that's true. I mean, we see changes seasonally in organisms all the time. Darwin's birds, his finches, he noticed changes in the beaks. Well, those are just minor variations within the species. There's be change over time. So we're talking about a real specific Darwinian mechanism of natural selection acting on random mutation within the DNA. All right? And then we talked about last week or last month about that DNA is very coded specific information along the DNA molecule. We found this out in the 1950s, that there's basically 4 chemicals that produce a 4-letter code just exactly like 4-bit computer code. And it gives the instructions on how to build protein. And those protein pieces are built, and then those protein pieces fold into certain shapes. We have information within them to fold into a certain shape, and then those protein form the basis for all the cells. And those cells form tissues, and those tissues form organs, and those organs are arranged differently in what's called different animal body plans. But their claim is it all begins at the level of DNA. And we do know that is coded. There's information in the DNA. So that's the level that we're going to be talking about. And so I proposed, we talked about there were 4 major issues with Darwinian evolution, or 4 problems, and we discussed the first 2, and I'll review those real quickly. And then we're going to move to intelligent design. So the purpose of this is not to bash evolution and say that because it's bad, intelligent design is our only option. The purpose is that we're going to say we're going to make an inference to the best explanation, and we want to know why do we even have information biologically to begin with? Where did this information come from? And the Darwinian evolution, or the Darwinian mechanism, says that it can beget itself, but we have a real problem with that, and they do biologically as well. So it's not to just bash Darwinism. It's look at it and say there's problems with that, and then let's look at what intelligent design's explanation is for the origin of information. And let's compare the 2 explanations and see if one is better than the other one. Okay? So we talked about, we have 4 problems with it. The first one we talked about was the Cambrian explosion, and this is during the Cambrian period about 520 million years ago. If we look at the fossil record, there was this sudden explosion of animal life. And the explosion showed almost all of the major body plans, body designs of animals that we currently know today. And they appeared suddenly in the fossil record without any fossil precursors. So what you would see in the Darwinian, you expect from Darwinian evolution, is that there would be transition of fossils in the fossil record below that. But we show actually none. And they thought that they just hadn't explored it enough. But they've been drilling for oil now for 100 years, and what they found are actually more fossils in the Cambrian explosion and no transitional fossils. So, is there a gap in the fossil record? Yes. Have they found fossils that close the gap? No. Will they? Probably not. But here's the point that we need to, that I want us to understand, is that there was a sudden, not only sudden explosion of animal life, but it takes information in the DNA to produce all those different types of body plans, those different types of organisms. So there was a sudden explosion of animals and a sudden explosion of information going on in the animal, in the fossil. And then we had origin of information expressed in DNA. So this is just a chart that we showed last time that showed in this period the sudden explosion of animals, and this is actually what it looks like versus Darwin's tree of common descent from a single organism. You'd expect a gradual branching out, and we get a field of grass or a field of different trees as opposed to a single tree during the Cambrian explosion. No fossil precursors with a sudden explosion of information introduced. And we gave examples of all the different types of body plans. And again, it's important to understand that if nature is going to build a new body plan, a design, something with let's say a chordate with an internal skeleton with a spinal cord versus a jellyfish, it's 2 totally different body plans. It takes different information in order for it to build itself out that way. Okay. The third area which is going to be new to us today is that early mutations in an organism cause death. So what they have discovered biologically is that in order for to produce a new body plan, if you're going to mutate the DNA, it needs to happen very, very, very early in its development process. If something happens later in the process, you just get minor variations, minor changes. Maybe a longer appendage, a shorter appendage, right? A longer beak, a shorter beak. But if you're going to build a new body plan, the mutation needs to happen very early on. And what they found is that mutating early in the development of organism causes embryonic lethals, or death. It kills it. It doesn't develop it. So the timing of this new information or change or mutation of information is everything. The DNA has to mutate early on. This is what's going on with early mutation. This is what happens when an organism is forming. The genes that are being developed are part of a very complex network of genes that actually dictate the function of all the other genes to follow behind it and what they're doing. It's called a regulatory network. And when scientists have studied this, they map it out what does this look like to you guys? Some of you guys. Circuit board. That's right. It's a very complex arrangement of genes that regulate the first development of the organism. And what would happen if you were to make a change or unplug a piece of a circuit board? Usually the whole system dies down, right? You can't get anything to do. If a little chip in your circuit board goes, the whole circuit board runs out. Well, this is what happens with the gene regulatory networks. So it needs to mutate early. The early genes in development are in its developmental network system. And if you mutate those or change those, it kills it off. Okay? So some scientists have said, well, all what happens is that we just kind of rewire the circuit board, right, to make a new body plan, ultimately. The problem with that is that that's really infusing new information. You got to kind of know what you're doing to rewire a circuit board. Okay, to do that. So I don't want you to get bogged down with this, but you just got to know that in order for something to mutate into a new body plan, the mutation has to be early on in the gene. Early mutation causes death, and this is why. Okay, doesn't bring about new body plans. All right. Epigenetics. This is what I would consider the nail in the coffin for Darwinian evolution. Epigenetics. Epi means above, other than, genetics. As we discussed earlier, this would be a picture of Bernard's conception of DNA. You can see the four letters, right, of the four chemicals that are along the DNA spine, and that's our four-letter computer code. They're arranged specifically for a certain reason. They're copied and sent out to create those proteins. That is the only information that is within the DNA molecule. It's just to build proteins. Okay, so let's put our thinking caps on now as we move forward here. Liken this to building a building or a house. Okay, think of all the materials it takes to build a building, right? Lumber, concrete, rebar, pipes, roofing materials, sheetrock, screws, nails, tape, all of those different components. Well, let's liken that to all the little protein molecules that the DNA makes during its replication process, right? Those are all the teeny little building blocks to build an organism. What's lacking is the information on how to assemble all of those pieces. You with me? Okay. DNA only has the information to make the proteins. It doesn't have information on what to do with it. That information they've discovered comes from outside the DNA, and that's called epigenetics. So the plan to build the house, all the construction drawings, come from more structural pieces within the cell itself. From outside the cell, there's sugar coatings that tell it how to find and attract to another cell. There's different pieces that tell it how to arrange those protein molecules into a different shape. That's information that is outside of the DNA molecule. Okay? So here's, and remember, now we're going back to the Darwinian model that says its mechanism for building new body plans is mutation in DNA and natural selection acting on that mutant DNA, right? It accepts that. Epigenetics says that you can mutate DNA all day long, you can mutate it till the cows come home, and you're never going to get a new body plan because the information to assemble that comes from a different source. Okay? This is such a strong discovery that a lot of scientists now internally are calling for a new mechanism. They're saying that the Darwinian mechanism, natural selection on randomization of the DNA molecule is not sufficient. It doesn't cut the mustard. We have to find something else. It's not doing it. Okay? Brings us to intelligent design. Let me start off a little bit talking to you about what intelligent design isn't. Okay? I hate doing this, but because I think it's more powerful to put together a positive case, but intelligent design is not an argument for God. Intelligent design is not a God of the gaps argument. Intelligent design isn't saying that because we don't know how organisms develop, God must have done it. Right? We're not making that claim. Intelligent designers aren't making that claim. Okay? Intelligent design uses a scientific method, right, to come up with a hypothesis that actually competes with the Darwinian evolution, right? And it comes up with a different answer. Okay? But it uses the same scientific method, incidentally, as Charles Darwin did when he came up with his hypothesis of origin of species. He uses the same scientific method. And that is called inference to the best explanation. Okay? It's a scientific method. Dan Grossenbach, who usually teaches this class, is an investigator. He has to go look at maybe a mailbox that was broken into, and he will look at it and he can determine maybe on how the door was broken off or how it was damaged, maybe some possible ways that it was broken into, right? He can look at different things and determine what makes best sense to explain why this mailbox was broken into and what were they looking for, what was in it, who was it all meant to be. So let's use the Rosetta Stone as an example. All familiar with the Rosetta Stone, right? It's got 3 different languages on it. It helped us understand hieroglyphics, okay? So here's a stone with 3 different languages on it, and we've got some choices. We could say that wind did this over a long period of time. Just sand kept hitting it through the windstorms, right? And it created these etchings on here. Because we know that wind and sand can do that, can't it? Okay. We can say that just erosion did it, maybe through water. It was sitting underneath, in a cave, and water just kept dripping on it, right? And it formed these etchings, because we know that water can do that to stone, right? Or we can say that it looked like there was an intelligent cause behind producing those markings. What would we say is the best explanation? Not you, Bart. We would say intelligence. Okay. Inference to the best explanation. That's the process that's used for intelligent design. So we're looking at all of this coding, all of this information in the DNA molecule, right? Very specific coding, right? Okay. And we're saying, what is a current cause in operation that is known to produce information? We're going to ask that question of the information that we find in the DNA molecule, or the information necessary in epigenetics to build a new body plan. What one cause in existence do we have? And really, we only have one, and that's a mind. Can anybody think of any other cause of intelligence? I don't think there is one either. So that's what we look at. That's what the intelligent designer's claim is. It's a scientific process. They're looking at the same information, and it is information, and they're coming up with a different conclusion. Okay? So let's take a moment and look a little bit at information. Because this is a lot of times where intelligent design people will kind of get, I guess, beaten up a little bit. People don't understand information. The intelligent design hypothesis or theory is not an analogy. It's a one-to-one correspondence. There's information in the DNA molecule, as is there's other information in computer code. It's the same thing. It's not analogous. It is information. It's digital information. Okay? So let's look at what they call as information is two. It has two categories. It has to be specified and it has to be complex. So if you look at the first sentence, THE, 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 right? There's a pattern to it. Okay? So you can say, yeah, there's a specified pattern to that, but it's not complex. It's just a repetition of the same thing over and over again. Okay? You look at the second sentence, and it's complex, right? We could sit there and try to break that apart, and maybe it's a code. Maybe it does mean something. We could work on that. But there's no specificity to it. We can't find any meaning behind it. We can't crack the code. It just appears to be a jumble of letters together. You look at the third sentence, and it's complex, and it's specified. It carries a meaning. Okay? So now we look at the information in the DNA molecule, the DNA code. It has both of these characters. It's specific. It has a specific function, right? And it's complex. Okay? You carry out multiple functions, as a matter of fact. Okay? So they've defined how to identify information by using these two criteria. Any information that you have, whether it's computer code, DNA molecule, the Rosetta Stone, right? It was all specified and it was complex. Okay? So again, they're asking the question, given specified complexity of the code and information that we find in the DNA molecule, what source do we know that's currently in operation? It's the mind. There's one and only one source. That really is as simple as what as intelligent design is. It makes that claim. It doesn't go beyond that. It doesn't say that it's God. Most people in this room can go beyond that and say God. If it's from a mind, it could be God. We could say that. But intelligent design stays within the scientific realm, right? And it just makes the claim. Now, for those of you that were in the first class, we talked about the problem that the scientific community has with every explanation has to be naturalistic. That they won't allow for any explanation of any cause that isn't naturally known, natural known cause. And this really is where the two communities bump heads. The scientific community won't allow it because a mind is not a physical cause. Okay? And it's kind of funny, they were kind of denying that they have a mind to make that decision, right? But to them, it's just a series of chemical reactions in their brain working somehow to come up with that conclusion, right? So really, the contention is, the scientific community feels it's got to have a physical cause. The intelligent design community says, we know, using the same scientific method that Darwin used, right, the inference of the best explanation, what current known cause do we have today that produces that effect? Using that same method, we're coming up with a conclusion that's outside of the physical realm. But everybody agrees that minds do exist. We know no other source of information. Information got to come from something somewhere, and that's a mind. That's the only source that we know. Okay? At this point, I'm going to leave it open for questions and comments. I know most of you are looking at you now, a lot of you were here last time, but I really would encourage you guys to ask some questions or make some comments here for the next 20 minutes and see if we can answer some of the questions that you guys have, or some of the things that you hear in the community about evolution or about intelligent design, and I can do my best to help you talk about those, give you a response to that. Bart?
Is this new information? I asked that question only because, you know, if you're a layperson in terms of religion, you've heard all your life that intelligent design, God. Maybe that's all I wanted to know. We've heard that all the time. So I'm just curious as to how recent this kind of discovery, I think, how recent.
Really, it's within the last 40 years that the intelligent design movement has been going on.
Way before I was born.
I know. Yeah. But it gets classified as being religion, or it gets classified as you're just trying to bring God into science. And that was one of the things that really bothered me initially, because you know what? You can't classify something out of existence. You can try, but you just can't do that. And so let's say, for argument's sake, you're right, it is about God. I'm trying to bring God into it. Well, then what? Is what we're saying false? What are you going to do with the information in the argument? Are you just going to run away from it and classify it and say we're not going to do anything with it? And that's in my interactions, that's what I see, that's what I hear a lot going on. It's about God, we can't talk about it.
Okay, I'm sorry, I came in just a little bit late and didn't catch it last week, or last time. But you just mentioned your interaction, and could you give me a brief rundown of who you are and what your qualifications are?
Yes.
What your interaction is?
Yeah, sure. You bet. I missed that. So I claim no qualifications, except that I am an avid reader. That this subject has bothered me for a long time, and I just dove in to do a lot of research myself on the subject. Yeah. So I don't hold any biology degrees. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a theologian.
Okay, but you've been interacting with whom?
With whom? You know, thanks to the social media boards, and you can really get into some good discussions. You can read articles, you can respond, you can get into some good chat queues. And then, guys, you know, I have a father who is a retired chemist, and he will not give intelligent design 2 seconds worth of conversation. Yep, he's a Christian. But he won't talk about it, because he's of that mindset that says the scientific community is not science. You know, but he won't even hear it. Yeah.
And recently, the United Methodist Church had an annual convocation or whatever in the Northwest, and the intelligent design people out of Portland, I think, wanted to put an exhibition on at their United Methodist.
Right.
And they wouldn't allow it, because
Right.
they said, we don't want this in the schools. Well, they weren't trying to put it in the schools, they were trying to put it in the United Methodist Church.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this must be the reason, that just, they're so unwilling to look at the mind part of it.
So here's what's going on from the from the design side, is that the intelligent design community, you go discoveryinstitute.org, they don't advocate teaching intelligent design. schools. They've never called for it, they don't, they won't, because they know that it takes away from their credibility. They've decided not to fight that fight. It's the people like Eugene and Scott on the evolution side who said that evolution is an airtight argument and it must be taught. So I think that especially for this group, there are some higher implication and questions that this really raises, that this debate raises. And that is, yeah, we need to explain the origin of information. But if Darwinian evolution is true and the new atheists are right, there really is no purpose or meaning to anything that we're doing. It logically follows that. If it's just a series of unguided random mutations, right, and we've just morphed into who we are, you can't claim any purpose or value or meaning to life. Ultimately, it's gone. That doesn't fit with me, right? And so I use part of my internal experiences to validate as well the inference, the best explanation. A guiding intelligence, a mind. It's just another layer of something that makes sense to me in my experience. Yeah.
So in your research, have any of the intelligent design folks discussed the possibility that Darwin would have come up with a different conclusion if he had the information he has?
Yes, absolutely. It's a good point. It's a leading question, thank you. Because he does, when he came up with his theory, the cell to him, he could draw it on his paper and just draw a nucleus, with a blob around it, and that's what they knew about cells. It was some kind of protoplasm. They knew nothing about information at all. The neo-Darwinian mechanism changed. And then, as I mentioned before, there are calls within the scientific community to change it. It needs to be changed. It needs to be tossed out, so looking for new material explanations and causes within the community. What's interesting, we don't hear about that. That doesn't get any time, right? What we hear about is that people are you're either educated by science or you're an ignorant person, right? To me, that's the general message that we get. Right? Quick question. Someone over here. Go ahead.
You said intelligent design evolves from a mind.
The information comes from a mind.
Where does the mind come from the scientific community?
Okay, so it stops there. Okay, because it doesn't know where it comes from. Okay.
Well, what's the best inference? That's their model. Intelligent design has a model of the best inference, right? It's kind of wishy-washy. Stop there. If the only inference of that information is a mind,
Well, you're getting into the realm of philosophy now at this point. Where would the mind come from? What is a mind? Right? You're getting into philosophy. So I don't know what you mean by it's getting wishy-washy. Intelligent design
you'll never
claims.
get an answer if you can't identify the source of the intelligence, the source of information. Science will never give you an answer, will it? Unless you make
No.
the best inference that mind, that information is God.
Philosophically, you can make that argument now that it's God.
What I'm saying is, there is no other inference, is there? And there never will be.
I agree with you. I agree with you. Yeah, I totally agree with you. But what I want us to understand and be careful with is, we don't, like the scientific community, it's not fair when they impose their views on the intelligent design. They really do have a specific, detail out what is it. And they say you stop at, it's a mind. You're gonna have to choose whether it's God or you're gonna have to find something else.
Well, yeah, but there isn't any evidence.
Well, some
Not that
people
I know.
believe in
Yeah,
aliens.
I agree with you.
And they,
That's what I wish you
Yeah.
If they come back and say it's the mind, you mean tell me they don't, when you ask them, where does the mind come from?
They will.
Let's say it's irrelevant, we're not gonna talk
No,
about
they
that.
will. They will say that. So they will say, look, it's, my personal view is, because I'm a Christian, that I believe it's God,
Okay.
and they'll say, Stephen Meyer, if you Google him, he'll talk about it. He's one of the leaders in this. He'll talk about that, he'll start talking like the book of Romans to you, Yeah, so they will say that. I think along this line as well, it also helps to understand that there are 5 really good arguments for the existence of God, right? The moral argument, the teleological argument, right? Cosmological argument, contingency argument. You add this to it, I think those other arguments support the fact that it's God. Yeah, but that's putting philosophy now right ahead of a scientific process.
The difficulty, that kind of begs the question, the difficulty with all this is that the scientific method has a big weakness. And the scientific method's weakness is that it's heavily biased by something that has 5 senses and a cognitive ability. And without that thing, that would be us, right? The scientific method doesn't work. And so when you ask somebody those kinds of questions, where does that mind come from? Now, all of a sudden, you've asked a question that transcends the ability of the scientific method to deal with it, and no one wants to recognize that their method that they've made all these hypotheses using is flawed.
And for sure it's inadequate. Yeah, they can't get to that realm. Yeah.
So I'm curious where the scientific community is going now to look for this outside force, this outside mind that provides the instructions or the information that's necessary for the DNA. What are you familiar with where they're going? I mean, it seems like it's almost a false hope.
Ding.
No, I say it seriously because there are a lot of smart people out there that probably recognize this, and unless their whole worldview will collapse unless they find something, and so they're on a very serious search, I would guess, and
So they're recognizing that the mechanism that they believe in just can't get them there. And so they're still going to search within the material realm for another way for that to happen. So as Todd was just saying, they're searching within this box. They just can't get outside of it. That's what they're searching for, is other ways. This epigenetics that I briefly touched is so complex. They're just breaking into it. And they're discovering all these other sources of information that are there that need to be there in order for you to build a new body plan. It's immensely complex. And one guy likened it to a caveman discovering a space shuttle, looking in and trying to figure it out. It's huge. Yeah, so they're still going to search the material space for that. Behind you there.
Oh, I was just gonna say that, isn't it Stephen Hawking who has this theory that everything came from nothing, but the nothing is something. And that's, have you seen that documentary?
I've heard about it.
Yeah.
If you do any reading on this, I would suggest you go to William Lane Craig and read him talk about the cosmological argument. He talks about that the Big Bang did start from zero to nothing. That's what Stephen Hawking says. It's zero. It was nothing. So nothing can't be something, and it's just a confusing group of words, isn't it? Yeah. But really, that's the other thing that the Darwinian mechanism, though, cannot explain, is that's the origin of information. Where does it come from? So even if this evolution was true, their process, it doesn't explain where does the information come from to begin with that was mutated. They can't explain the origin of it. Scientifically, they would have to use the same scientific process that intelligent design does to try to find the origin of information. And that's what chemical evolution is looking into, is that. Go back to your question, though, for a minute about what are other communities doing, is there's a third view that I didn't talk about and that's called theistic evolution. And that was started by Francis Collins. It's the name of his book. It will come to me. But that he's a Christian man that decided that, you know, in order to keep the Christian church active and alive, that they needed to claim that Darwinian evolution was true and have that mesh with Christianity. And it causes some real issues, because their claim is that God just set everything in motion and let this random stuff happen. Well, they can't, as you can imagine, they just can't explain how would you do that. So the scientific community absolutely rejects it. Christian community, from where I'm coming from, they would reject a literal Adam and Eve, right? Special, specific creation is gone. You can't do that, right? They can't say how and when and if God is even active after he put everything out there just to let happen. Because if he's active in it at any point, at all, one time, then that's intelligent design, right? That's an intelligent agent acting on a cause, right? So intelligent design says if there's an intelligent agent that acts, it leaves its footprint or fingerprint, that being complex and specific information. So if God was active, he would leave his fingerprint or footprint. So theistic evolution, really, I hope it just dies away, because it just is an attempt to try to make the two camps come together so the church will survive. Yeah. More questions? Comments?
Two things, I guess. You know, first of all, the difference between the classical Darwinism and neo-Darwinism, you're just getting down to the addition of DNA as
Yeah.
far as so that's all it is. It's just,
So initially Darwin thought that if his finches, his beaks, right? In a dry season, they needed longer beaks to get at their food, right? And so those birds that had longer beaks were able to feed themselves, and so that trait was passed on and inherited, okay? Woolly sheep in northern Scotland, right? There was a cold spell, and the sheep that had a thicker, heavier wool survived, the other ones died off, so that trait was, that's Darwin's theory.
okay,
And they
but
go ahead.
but how did Darwin get to, not woolier sheep, longer beaks, but to body structures that aren't there?
Okay, so he looked at the fossils and the physical world, and he said he imagined that those traits caused those massive changes in complete body plan. So he worked backwards and talked about his tree of life, that those mutations happen frequently, often, right, and were not lethal, right? They were just inheritable traits that over a period of time happened. And he knew about the Cambrian fossils. And he said that that caused a problem to his theory. But he felt that they would discover fossils underneath that layer that would show transitionary fossils. So if you think about it, it doesn't take long for a species to make those minor changes, right? But if you're talking the Earth over a few million years old, or a long period of time, that you could get those big, huge changes to create amendments. Okay, does that answer your question?
Okay, yeah, I just was wondering about the difference between,
Yeah.
neo-Darwinism.
So in the 1950s, Watson and Crick discovered DNA, right, the code in that, right, and then that became the mechanism that needed to mutate for neo-Darwinian evolution.
Now, just this last week, something interesting happened that's kind of analogous to that there was on an uninhabited island in the Pacific, there were palm fronds that spelled out help.
Uh-huh.
Now, what to the Navy flyovers where it was discovered that, immediately they realized, hey, there are people down there, and they went on a rescue mission. But the scientific community would take that, oh, that's an uninhabited island. Let's try to figure out other reasons for the palm fronds being, coming out and help. Well, they fell down in just a random way, things like this, And so if you start with the presupposition that there is no intelligent being,
Right.
you outlaw that from the beginning, you come up with some fairly ridiculous conclusions.
I agree. You do, that's right. You gotta find some way of finding out how nature spelled help. Yeah. In the meantime, somebody's dying, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe you guys covered this last week, or last month, so whenever I talk to people about this in the scientific community, they always bring up the dating process and how stuff is dated very old and all that kind of stuff, through the various mechanisms like carbon dating and stuff like that. What's our argument for that stuff? What's intelligent design's kind of view on that?
So, intelligent design doesn't, you can just put to a side a young Earth, old Earth view. It doesn't matter. What they're looking at is that there's a specific complex information set that's out there in order to necessary to build animals and build new body plans and build all that. Whether it happened in this much time or this much time, it doesn't matter. The idea is, where does that information come from? Okay? So, doesn't matter, age of the Earth. So intelligent design, my understanding, most of the guys in that community will probably believe that the Earth is, 4.5 billion years old, whatever the standard scientific community accepts. Yeah. Question?
You mentioned briefly that the intelligent design advocates are not pushing that concept.
Correct.
Why do they, if that's their best idea, why is that?
Because it's caused more problems for them than it's hurt their cause to pick that fight. Because evolution is so entrenched and it's so powerful. And then you get into the colleges and universities, it's even worse. So they've just decided that it's not a good place to pick a fight. Yeah, sad. Yeah.
So in universities, there aren't very many people that follow the intelligent design.
So you're stretching my knowledge base here. Just my impression is that the scientific community is basically within the universities. That's who does the studies. The professors get their sabbaticals and their time and have to do their research papers. So that's where it is, and so that mindset is in the university because that's where the research is happening. Sure.
So the neo-Darwinism is just still a stronghold in the university?
Yes. Yeah. Your question? Anything else? Yeah.
As a non-biologist participant in the university, I would say it's almost a religion. Well, it is a religion. I would call it scientism, where if you don't buy into neo-Darwinian theory, you just aren't very smart, and you're not acceptable, and the system will reject you. And so it's very difficult for a young Christian biologist who sees a marketplace for ideas here and can argue both sides of this argument. They really don't have a place.
Right.
You don't have a place.
Yeah.
When I entered, I wasn't sure what you were trying to say. Were you saying that DNA doesn't change because the enzymes always put together the DNA sequences? What were you trying to say?
I don't know when you entered.
I entered when you were talking about how DNA doesn't change because of being passed down because the enzymes are the ones that are putting the DNA together.
I'm I may have been talking about the epigenetics, that all DNA does is code for proteins and build proteins.
Right.
And it doesn't tell, there's no information on how to assemble it properly to build new body plans. That comes from outside the gene in epigenetic information, and cell structure and sugar coatings and all those things in the genes that tell it how to form. So you can mutate DNA all day long and never get the information necessary to build a new body plan. That information comes outside the gene.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
Isn't most of the evidence that's brought up for evolution actually microevolution or adaptation and variation? People misunderstand the long peak versus the short peak. That's not a mutation. It's just a variation or an adaptation to deal with the surroundings. It's not an actual mutation, like how there are tons of different breeds of dogs, but they're all still dogs.
Right. How old are you?
16.
16? What school do you go to?
I'm homeschooled.
You're homeschooled, okay? Rats. All right. Good for you. I'm glad you are. To get your perspective on what you hear in your school. So you bring up, I think, one of the most important points. And that's to understand and define your terms when somebody's talking to you or you're reading about something. And you know what? I'm amazed. I am not a scientist. I could mix, Clorox and Scope when I was a kid, and that was my chemistry. But I don't know. But I do know that when I hear these educated guys talk about it, they will shift the definition of their terms all the time. Like Stephen Hawking said, it's nothing, but there's something that came. It's like. They do this all the time, and I see that scientists, on the most part, have really stumbled with philosophy. They're not good at it. And so it's so important to define your terms because, yes, I think everybody agrees that there are minor changes that drift among species, absolutely. And everybody agrees if that's what evolution is, we can just go home. We all agree. But that's not what they're talking about ultimately. So you bring up the best point. You just have to understand and know your terms. And then if you're getting into a conversation with someone, one of the best things to do is to define the terms up front. If they say you don't believe in evolution, and say, well, if you're talking about minor changes over time, of course I believe that. But if you're talking about common descent, right, that's caused by mutation of genes and natural selection acting on that, I don't. And here's 4 major problems that I have.
I appreciate all the work that you've done in research. I have a question relative to what you've looked at. Have you run into the people on the healthcare side who've been looking at the genome for a number of years as to some of their conclusions relative to intelligence design? I spent a long time in that field where the company I worked with funded genetic research. And I think the thing that we've found in the healthcare business is that people are constantly trying to find why a particular problem exists. Why is this lung cancer untreatable or whatever? What I've seen with some of those scientists who work on that is they quickly come to appreciate that there's something beyond, cause and effect that has gotten them to that point. Right down to there's multiple mitochondrial issues that they can't explain, they just document. And I'm just wondering, in your research, have you seen a crossover of people coming to those conclusions on the healthcare side? If you haven't, that's fine. I'm just wondering. Let's see.
I haven't researched enough to get to that degree of observation, but I will tell you this, it's interesting because I just recently read some articles in the medical field that are really doing the groundbreaking research on the epigenetic portion of this because they understand that mutating DNA doesn't get you much anymore. that all this other epigenetic information, now they're looking to that to cure other things. And it was a real high-level article that I read, and that's what I got. Yeah, we'll put an expert in the back.
I was interested in why you thought those researchers were looking for something outside.
I don't think they were looking for it. I think they come to that conclusion because they're trying to figure out why this particular thing is exhibiting itself in a patient. And when they go back and they do the research, they can break it down at the DNA level, at the human genome level, to say that's probably a marker for this. But in doing so, they come to the conclusion that it's pretty complex stuff. It just doesn't happen organically. There's a reason that these things are put together.
You're saying they find markers, but they don't find that the markers are the cause of what's exhibited symptomatically?
Not always.
Oh.
Yeah, again,
It
to
gives you
me,
that it's a lot more complex than just,
yeah,
theories.
yeah. And then the other thing too is you guys heard of the term Occam's razor? Just when you're looking at an argument or trying to make a decision, it just says take the explanation that has the least amount of doubts in it, right? Things that the most obvious, the most plain, the fewer explanations in it, right? And really, to me, that's where, in my mind, where intelligent design lies on this issue. Because all science has done to this point to this is just discovered more sources of information. It hasn't discovered how it's originated, right? It didn't discover the transitionary fossils that below in the Precambrian era. It discovered more Cambrian fossils, right? It's just discovered more information, right? It's just pointing to it. So we're here in this room together, and it's just like we know which mind we're talking about, right? Right? It's pretty splendid, you know. God's creation visible. You see His hand in everything. Yeah.
What excites me about this is that when I was growing up, the church looked at science and discovery as something to be afraid of, because they didn't seem to have answers, and they were afraid of people losing their faith. I think the awesome part is that scientists are, like Christian scientists are not afraid of new discoveries by evolutionists. They aren't afraid of their own new discoveries. People aren't afraid of solving the puzzles anymore. I feel like a lot of our brethren are discovering that the puzzles were there for us, made by God, for us to go out and discover His world, and to know that when they find the answers, they're going to reflect Him.
Right. Yeah. Okay. We're ready to wrap it up. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, we're comment.
Okay.
Good job.
If you're interested in just kind of getting in research through Dan, we'll send out some resources for you to learn to learn from. If you're interested in more of that, it'd be great. But I just hope that what I wanted to accomplish was, and through both classes, was just to understand that there are major problems with Darwinian evolution that we, as a public, don't hear about. It's being discussed in the scientific community. There's a call for radical change in it. And intelligent design has a competing hypothesis. It's not a God of the gaps. It's not pushing religion. It's using a scientific method. It comes up with an alternate conclusion to the same, looking at the same set of data. And if we keep an open mind, we're sure to get closer to the answer, right? Okay, that's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
So a few quick announcements. Next month, the Reason Why class is going to happen twice, and it will be on May 15th and May 22nd. I think Dave Dent is speaking on how, as Christians, we can be involved in politics, and where the how to go about doing that. And so that's next month. And then also, I was asked if anyone would like to volunteer for our children's ministries. We need workers for the nursery, for Sunday school, for Catalina Kids, and then also for VBS this summer. So I'm gonna have this sign up. I'm just gonna put it over on the pool table if anyone wants to get signed up for that. Thanks again, people.
What is VBS this summer?
It is